You're back with The Nation and our extended interview with the Prime Minister, John Key, this morning. Prime Minister, an editorial in The Economist recently pointed to an issue where it said income inequality was the growing issue for Western nations now, the divide between the rich and poor. And it says that the key reason for that is that the rich become rich through capital gain. Will you ever enter into the debate about introducing a capital gains tax?
Well, I'm happy to enter into the debate, but if you're asking me whether we should have an extended capital gains tax in New Zealand, the answer is no. And my view is supported by a lot of people who aren't in politics and who are extremely knowledgeable in this area. And the reason being, we have a form of capital gains tax in New Zealand. If you go and buy a rental property and you buy it and sell it, then the tax department will charge you a capital gains tax on that. If you even say, my intent, because we have intent rules, are to rent that, but you start turning those properties over, they'll take a very good look at you. And over the last few years, IRD have employed quite a number of additional people whose job it has been to go and look at those particular cases, and there's been a lot more revenue coming in. So the question is, will we go to a capital gains tax, the form that Labor are promoting? And the answer is no, because they don't work.
So how will you close the gap then?
Well, you close the gap by trying to lift, if you can, those who are the least well off into a form of higher income. I mean, in the end, it doesn't really matter, I think, whether Graham Hart is fabulously richer than I am. It doesn't make an iota of difference to either me or Graham Hart. What does matter, though, is if you have people on very low levels of income, generally welfare dependent, but very low levels of income. And we know through, again, all of the academic research, the only way to do that is through education. I mean, in the end, the way out of poverty is through work. And I go back to what I said earlier in the first segment.
Job creation and what have you. But
let me just give you one example of that. We sit around and we talk a lot about the economy being tough, and it is tough. No one's arguing that. But for a lot of New Zealand households, they're doing quite well at the moment. Superannuation has gone up considerably. If you're in a job, let's just take a normal New Zealand couple and they're in a job and they're salary based or whatever it might be. Their mortgages are on a 50-year low. The inflation rate is extremely low.
So they can get onto the housing market, though, isn't it? I mean,
yeah, but if you take the majority, though, the majority actually sit in that category. So the majority
you don't
either own the house or...
do you? I mean, how do you close
so this is
gap?
my point. My point is that, so if you get to take a step back and say, for a lot of New Zealanders, if they're reasonably well educated and a reasonably secure job, their environment is actually pretty good. And that's one of the reasons probably why, bluntly, our numbers have held up politically for 6 years, because a lot of people have looked at it and they're in that category.
Okay.
But the people that are really affected are the people you're talking about. They are suffering from either losing their job, overtime is lower, maybe their kids are not necessarily getting work, and so they're having to depend on them.
There's just an emerging gap, to be honest, between the rich and poor. If you look at, say, the housing price to income at the moment, it was 3.3 10 years ago. I think it's 4.5 now. Getting on the housing market is extremely difficult. This is a very different New Zealand to what you grew up at, when anybody could be Prime Minister.
Well, it changes. Well, I think anyone can be Prime Minister. I don't think that matters. I think anyone can become Prime Minister if they have the ambition
the path
and
for
the
a number
drive
of
to
people,
do it.
though, Prime Minister, now is getting much more difficult to walk.
Okay, so then the question is, how do you get them to be on a pathway then where they are more sustainable in their own right? Because in my view, every New Zealander wants to be completely independent. I think they want to have job security. They want to have a good life. Young families want to be able to buy a home and do well, and they don't want to be terrified of opening the bills or having their little kiddies sick and being unable to look after them properly. People want basic things in their lives, but that has to come through education. And one of the things I worry a lot about is we live in a very different world. 50 years ago, we had a lot of unskilled jobs in New Zealand. Today, we don't have that. And so if you go back to lower levels of participation in ECE for Maori and Pacific young people, if we go through the dropout rate for Maori and Pacific young people, yes, we're doing better in terms of education. Some fabulously successful Maori and Pacific kids coming through, but we've still got a lot that aren't, and you can track that all the way through to welfare dependency, and that's where the government is changing. More money in training, more money in service academies. You keep coming back to education,
that's a theme so far through this interview. Are you satisfied with how Hekia Parata is running that ministry? Yes,
and I'll tell you this for nothing. Any national member who is the Minister of Education will get beaten up by the sector. It's been there for time immemorial. I dare you to show me a national minister that hasn't had a hard time from the union movement. But I say this to the union movement: are you really satisfied with the the performance of every teacher in that sector. Are you really satisfied with the outcomes of all the schools in New Zealand?
It's a teaching and schooling issue, nothing to do with the ministry.
Well, I happen to think my own view is we are incredibly lucky to be serviced the way we are by many of the principals and teachers in New Zealand. I go to schools every week and they do a fantastic job. But I'm telling you now, there are some kids that are falling between the cracks. When we brought in national standards, the sector yelled and screamed and didn't like it. But when we go and talk to those very Christchurch schools at the moment that we're talking about potential amalgamation, sure, they quote national standards back to us. When I go into the staff room now, even if they don't like national standards, they are talking to me about educational achievements and outcomes,
sure,
and that's a great change to make.
We've had backtracks by Heke Parata. We're not even paying our teachers at the moment, Prime Minister.
Okay, so if you take, firstly, in terms of backtracks, yeah, of course, we decided in the end to abandon the slight change in class size numbers for professional development.
Quite a significant change, I think it would have been.
Well, it was $40 million out of a $10 billion spend, or $4 billion in that part of education, but $10 billion overall. Yeah, okay, so in the end we said, was it worth 6 months or a year of potential strikes and a lot of disruption, all of these things? And the answer probably on balance was no, and there was too much... Maybe we should have known that beforehand. We did know that. We did know that. We
still pushed ahead with it.
Well,
and then
there was a bit of concentration in the intermediate sector, intermediate schools, which was too pronounced. And even though we gave a guarantee that we would keep it at no more than 2 teachers, that message, it was lost in translation. All I can tell you is sometimes it's better to take a step back. But if you want to improve outcomes, it's about more professional development for teachers. Because in the end, the most important thing to mum and dad is not whether there are 22 children in the class, not 21. I'll tell you for nothing, the number one thing is the quality of the teacher and the quality of the principal. I go into plenty of decile 1 and 2 schools around this country, and I would send my children there tomorrow, and I go to decile 10 schools, I wouldn't. And it all comes from the principal
yelling
and teachers.
At the televisions at the moment, watching this, saying, well, can you get Craig Frost to do his job and pay us for a start?
There would be dozens of teachers who would agree with me, because despite what people say, the vast bulk of New Zealand teachers are outstanding. They care passionately about our kids and they do incredibly well. But if your child happens to be sitting in front of a teacher that's not doing their job well, and look, we get MPs that don't do their job well, we get police officers that don't do their job well, we owe it to those kids for professional development to get them up the scale. In terms of pay, yes, of course, there's been some issues with Nova pay.
3 months without pay, some teachers.
Well, that situation shouldn't be there. So for a start off, the important thing to understand is they make about 92,000 transactions per pay round. The first couple of pay rounds were not good enough. In fact, none of them have been so far, but they were the much worse end of not good enough. And about 8,000 payments there was a problem with 8,000 payments. They've largely, as I understand, now been resolved. We've said to any teacher that hasn't been paid, go to your school and make sure you're paid out of the operations grant, and we will make sure that school is paid. So there's no reason why a person couldn't be paid. We've also said if you have had a missed payment and that has cost you as a teacher, mortgage payment, whatever it means, we'll make you whole there. But it's not good enough in terms of what Talent 2 have done, and there were assurances made to the Minister when he rolled out Nova Pay, and those assurances were that the system was good to go, and there were problems. It's not full-time teachers, I might add, though, it's relieving teachers.
If you have an opportunity for a reshuffle, will you move Heke Parata?
No, not at all. Heke Parata is doing an outstanding job. Look, in the end of the day, this is a big ministry with some entrenched views, with some real issues. But Heke's main focus has been on the very issue you started this segment on, and that is, how do you change the lot of those people who at the moment are not being well served by society? And the answer is, get them a world-class education and you'll make a difference.
All right, on the issue of having a reshuffle, when are you likely to announce, Prime Minister, that Lockwood Smith is going to be High Commissioner for London? When's that likely to be?
But that decision might be made pretty soon. And, you know, if that's the situation, if that's what does occur, then Lockwood will be an outstanding High Commissioner for this country. He has, I think, done a brilliant job as Speaker.
Is he the front runner?
Well, I hope so. That decision's yet to be made.
And who would then replace him as Speaker?
We haven't made that decision yet. We're working our way through.
You've got a bit of shuffling to do, because you need to find a position, I guess, for Kate Wilkinson. as well. Nick Smith, is it likely he could come back into the ministerial post?
It's possible he'll come back. I've always argued the case that, look, Nick has an enormous brain, lots of talent, huge amount of skills and a massive amount of experience. I think at the margins he made a minor mistake. It wasn't significant and there was no malice there, but he did the honourable thing in stepping down there. I think that was the right thing, but I'm not ruling out him coming back.
OK, you've come out of that honeymoon period of your first term. You've mentioned this a few times, and you've sort of your second term, be polite of me to say it's been a bit bumpy. I want to go through some of the issues that you've faced. You've had Kim.com, GCSB, ACC, Sky City Convention Centre, John Banks intermittently bouncing in there, the issues with education, water rights, the sale of state assets or not, as the case may be. So, do you have any regrets about the way you've managed any of those issues?
Well, there's always things you can do better. I mean, every piece of, well, I'm not going to go through those. That's for you to critique them, not me. That's what political journos are paid to do. In the end, though, I make thousands of decisions and involved in lots of different issues, and we do our best in the knowledge and information that we have at the time. But you say Sky City Convention Centre is a problem. I don't. Personally, in my view, this country needs a convention centre. We're talking about jobs. It was controversial.
It is controversial about whether it fuels gambling.
What is controversial about the government being upfront before an election with the Mayor of Auckland saying this is a good idea to extend the convention centre? Yes, there might be some changes around poking machines. That, by the way, is the same deal done by the previous Labour government, and Helen Clark opened that convention centre.
Does it?
Well, in my view, that's a controlled environment. It's arguably a better environment when you've got an overall reduction in poker machines happening around Auckland and around New Zealand.
And a lack of money that then is injected into the economy because of that.
No, well, again, if you want to take that view, you have to take the pure view of saying that gambling is bad and then therefore gambling should be banned everywhere. And all I ask you is how are you going to ban online gambling? Because if you want to ban horses and lotto and casinos, you can do that.
Do you have a flat at yourself, Prime Minister?
Not at the casinos, I'm not terribly interested, and not in lotto because I'm not terribly interested, but I buy my sister's lotto tickets and hope they win, and I occasionally have a flutter at the races if it's the Melbourne Cup or something. But,
okay, well you've had all these scenarios though, and they've been coming thick and fast.
All of these things you see, I don't agree with your synopsis of it. Look, Kim.com came to New Zealand. The truth of it is that the Americans believe that he has broken the copyright laws.
To react pretty quickly to them.
They invoked the extradition treaty in New Zealand. For all of TV3's conspiracies, they'll be proved to be wrong. The bottom line is that what happened with Kim.com was that he came to New Zealand. When he was in New Zealand, the belief of the American authorities is that he's broken copyright laws. And again, the simple point here is they invoked their extradition treaty. Now, if Kim.com's done absolutely nothing wrong, if that's the proposition, it may well be right. I don't even have a view on that.
Will we apologise to him?
Well, there's a really simple way of resolving it. Kim.com gets on a plane, he goes to America, he fights his case, he wins it, he restarts his business in New Zealand, and he says to the Americans, you were wrong.
And will we say
Pretty
sorry?
Simple way of doing it.
Will we say sorry?
If he wins his case and he comes back, I won't say sorry for the Americans invoking the extradition treaty. That's, if we want to pull out of that treaty, we can, but when that little girl Pumpkin was abandoned at Melbourne Airport, her father went to America and we invoked the extradition treaty and got him out.
Pretty different situation though.
No, it's not.
It is really.
No, it's not.
We rolled in there with...
No, it's different in the slightest.
Okay.
No, you see, this is where the theory is wrong from TV3. The theory is that somehow out there, we're out there to get Kim.com. We don't have a view.
We jumped very quickly.
No, we didn't. We invoked the extradition treaty.
It's a pretty heavy-handed technique.
No, we didn't. We did what we think is safe.
It wasn't very Kiwi. It was very American, the way we rolled in there.
So you think a property that they went into, where we now know that there were firearms, you think the police officer just walk in, if that police officer gets shot dead, no, hold on, that police officer gets shot dead, are you telling me, Rachel, that's all okay?
Because I don't have an opinion on it.
Okay, I don't think it is okay, and I think the police absolutely did their job properly.
We'll let the court sort it out.
Well, that's what we're dealing with. See, in my world, I don't get the luxury of that. In my world, I set rules that I expect the police to follow through the legislation that we have. They're independent, they make their own decisions, but I back them when they say that the potential risk to their officers is a risk they have to take, and I think they should have taken those risks seriously.
You're happy with how it's all been handled?
Yeah, well, I mean, again, GCSB made a mistake. There's no question about that. And for that, I've apologised and I regret. It was made by officers without reference to me, and it would never be referenced to me. But again, people make mistakes. That happens in life.
All right, Prime Minister, we do have to leave it there. Appreciate your time this morning. Thank you.